The story of Missy and Michael Maver is one of those tragic and brutal cases that is nearly impossible to comprehend, let alone discuss. The murders of this beloved couple shook their community, but it was the cruel nature of the crime that truly left everyone stunned. Missy was 9 months pregnant at the time of her death, which made the case even more heartbreaking and personal for everyone involved, from the detectives trying to solve the case to the residents of Florida who were disturbed by the brutality of the crime. This is the story of the murders of the Maver family, a family who was cruelly torn apart before they could even begin their journey together. The beginning of their lives. Susan Michelle Immel, who preferred to go by Missy, was born on July 24, 1962, in Titusville, Pennsylvania. From a young age, Missy's personality was infectious. She had the kind of smile that could light up a room and a warmth that drew people to her instantly. She was known for being sweet, caring, and incredibly nurturing, traits that made her beloved by everyone who knew her. Missy had a deep love for children, which led her to pursue a career as an elementary school teacher, a job she had always dreamed of. She worked tirelessly to make her dream a reality, and by the time she settled into her life in Florida, she was a dedicated and passionate educator. Michael Maver, born on April 15, 1961, in Cincinnati, Ohio, came from a family with a deep love for aviation. His mother, who earned her pilot's license at just 16, and his father, an airline captain, introduced Michael to airplanes from a very early age. He spent his childhood fascinated by aircraft, often taking apart and reassembling planes in his backyard. By the time he was 13, Michael had already flown a plane, and by 17, he was rebuilding engines on his own. His love for aviation eventually led him to become a professional pilot and certified flight engineer, and by his late 20s, he had started his own business, Tamiami Aircraft Accessories, in Dade County, Florida. It was in 1987, while Michael was living in Florida, that he met Missy. They first locked eyes at a nightclub and spent the rest of the night talking. Their connection was instant, and they quickly became inseparable. 2 years into their relationship, they moved into a private airport community in Key Largo, where they bought a beautiful home and began making plans for their future. They dreamed of having 5 children, and in May of 1990, they married in a small, intimate ceremony in their backyard, surrounded by love and support from family and friends. Everyone who knew them could see that they were a perfect match. A new beginning. In January of 1991, Missy found out she was pregnant, and Michael couldn't have been happier. The couple eagerly began preparing for the arrival of their baby. They converted the guest room into a nursery, and as the months passed, they reveled in the anticipation of becoming parents. They had already chosen a name for their son, Kyle Patrick Maver, and were making plans for his birth. Everything seemed to be falling into place for the couple, but tragically, their dreams would never come to fruition. As August approached, a tropical storm started to make its way towards the Florida Keys. The storm was powerful enough to cause concern, though it wasn't classified as a full hurricane. The winds picked up, the rain began to pour, and the skies darkened, signaling the arrival of the storm. On the night of August 21, 1991, after attending a LeMays class together, Michael and Missy hunkered down at home, waiting for the storm to pass. Like many others in their community, they stayed indoors, knowing it was too dangerous to venture out. But amid the storm's fury, a monster moved in the darkness. A person with a twisted purpose, motivated by rage and a thirst for violence, quietly made their way towards the Maver home. It was during this storm that the Mavers' lives were violently and tragically ended. The discovery. The next morning, as the storm subsided, life slowly returned to normal. Children returned to school, and teachers discussed the wild storm that had passed through the night before. However, Missy, one of the most dedicated teachers at Key Largo Elementary, was absent. It was highly unusual for Missy to miss work, and on the rare occasions that she did, she always called ahead to let her colleagues know. Her absence that day was alarming, and her colleagues became increasingly worried as the hours passed. They contacted Michael's sister, Sharon, to inquire about Missy's whereabouts. Sharon tried calling the Maver home multiple times, but there was no answer. Even the answering machine appeared to be malfunctioning. Concerned, Sharon called a couple of Missy's colleagues, who decided to visit the house in person to check on her. When they arrived at the Mivor residence, they found the doors locked and the curtains drawn, but one curtain was only partially closed, revealing a disturbing sight. Through the crack in the window, they saw a person lying motionless on the floor. They couldn't tell who it was, but the feet that were visible were positioned at an unnatural angle, suggesting that the person was unconscious or worse. The sight was enough to make their hearts race with fear. At that moment, their neighbor, Bill, arrived, having noticed something unusual at the house. He quickly rushed to break down the door, and what they found inside was even more horrifying than they could have imagined. The crime scene. Inside the Mivor home, an eerie silence hung in the air. There were no sounds of life, no voices, no movement, just stillness. It was as though the home had been abandoned by life itself. The first body they discovered was Michael's. He was lying on his back in the living room, his arms and legs outstretched. Masking tape was wrapped around his head, covering his mouth, and a white sock was placed in front of each of his eyes. Police later determined that Michael had been killed with a metal bar, which had been wrapped in a towel and left in the kitchen. His throat had been stomped on, and deep abdominal bruises suggested that he had been kicked in the stomach before he died. The discovery in the master bedroom was even more disturbing. Missy's naked body was found, her wrists bound to her ankles with a cloths line and a necktie tightly wrapped around her neck. Tape covered her eyes, and her nightshirt had been violently torn off. She had been sexually assaulted, and her underwear had been cut off with a sharp instrument. Missy's struggle was evident from the ligature marks on her neck, indicating that she fought desperately for her life. Tragically, after several failed attempts at strangulation, the killer finally succeeded in taking her life. Missy's unborn child, Kyle, also died as a result of the brutal attack. Medical examiners determined that he had suffocated in the womb due to the lack of oxygen after his mother was strangled. Missy's death, along with the death of her unborn child, left the community shattered. The investigation. Detective Jerry Powell was assigned to investigate the murders. The crime scene suggested that the killer was both methodical and experienced. The phone lines had been cut, and the killer had gained entry to the home through the nursery, which had been accessible via a ladder left by a contractor. The storm had provided the perfect cover for the killer, allowing him to slip in and out of the house unnoticed. The fact that the killer had scavenged materials from the house, such as the tape and rope used to bind the victims, indicated that he knew exactly what he was doing. This wasn't his first time committing such a heinous act. The investigation soon revealed that Michael's business dealings weren't as straightforward as they had initially seemed. He had made several trips to Biz, a known hub of narcotics production, and police learned that he had borrowed a substantial sum of money for the purchase of a plane. The police began to look into Michael's past, wondering if his business connections had led to the brutal killings. The search for the killer. As the months went by, the search for the killer continued, but no clear suspects emerged. 3 potential suspects were ruled out after providing DNA evidence, including Missy's ex-husband. The investigation began to focus on the possibility that the killer was someone close to the Mivors. The nature of the crime, especially the brutal assault on Missy, suggested that the killer had personal motives and knew his victims. It would take years before the case was solved, and even now, the question of who could commit such a brutal crime remains one of the most chilling mysteries in Florida's history. The residents of Tavernero, the private community where the Mivors lived, took extra precautions after the murders, installing alarm systems and arming themselves with weapons, fearing that they might be the next targets. Though the case remains unsolved, the memory of Michael, Mizzy, and their unborn son continues to haunt those who knew them. The story of the Mivor family is a heartbreaking reminder of how quickly a life can be extinguished and how fragile the safety of a community can be. As the investigation continues, the desire for justice remains strong.